Hello and welcome to the 2020 Tom Farms Appreciation Event. As you well know, 2020 has been very different, including the way we've conducted business here at Tom Farms and the way we're holding this event. We hope you enjoy this hybrid version of our event this year. On this video, you'll hear from Ambassador Kip Tom and an update from him from Rome, Italy. You'll also hear from Christy Wendell, our Bayer Crop Science seed rep. Christy will talk about the importance of sharing your story. And finally, you'll hear from Polly Dobbs on estate planning. Tonight, we'd also like to thank our sponsors to make this event possible: Bayer Crop Science, DeKalb Asgrow, The Climate Corp, BSF, Central Indiana Ethanol, Ag One, and Oxbow. We believe we can speak for everyone around the world. 2020 has been challenging, to say the least. And I think we're all ready to take a hike. But with those challenges brings opportunity that we may have missed. So find the opportunity and the bright spot in your day. We appreciate you coming to our event tonight and hope you enjoy the rest of the video.
Good afternoon and good evening. Welcome back to the Tom Farms annual land partner and vendor event. It's an honor to have you come by, even during these consequences that we're living in right now of COVID-19 and the impact it has on our country and many around the world. I'll give you a little idea of what I'm doing here in Rome, Italy, serving the United States of America. My position entails mainly working on food security around the world. Our task is to make sure we feed the needy and at the same time to create resilience and capacity in farming systems in developing countries all around the world. You know, the first line of defense is making sure our country remains with peace and security. As Secretary Pompeo has told me many times, we are the first line of defense for our country. Because if people aren't food secure, they're going to migrate. And when they migrate, they get caught up in extremism, they get caught up in human trafficking, arms movement, illicit drug trade, and migrating to places that aren't able to take care of them once they arrive. So our job here is to make sure that people are food secure around the world. And it's not easy. You know, the World Food Program, which is nearly an $8.5 billion budget this past year, in which the United States contributes over 40%. In fact, Americans give more per capita than any other nation in the world. Something to be proud of as Americans. At the same time, I represent the Food and Agriculture Organization that quite candidly has not been on track the last 20 years in developing resilience and capacity in farming systems around the world. We've been blocked from allowing innovation to come in the 54 countries, mainly in Africa, East Asia, Central America, South America. Our footprint is global, and we intend to make changes to make sure people can improve lives and their livelihoods. But I want to go back to the World Food Program for just a minute. We know that due to COVID-19, that it's not going to be the impact of COVID-19 on lives across the developing world in terms of the pandemic itself. It's about the impacts from COVID, the crisis following the crisis, as many of us are aware of. To address this issue, we've increased funding. We actually have a budget of nearly $11 billion. We know at the same time, if we're not successful raising that money, if we're not successful in delivering that food aid around the world, that we could see upwards of 300,000 people a day for 3 months pass away due to the lack of food security. So our job is big here in Rome, Italy. It may look like a nice place to live. You can look behind me and see some of the great Roman walls. That's all nice. But the reality is we have work to do here. We're fortunate to have a number of other great people from the United States of America working here in our embassy. And I can tell you, they know the task at hand. Our embassy is small, but like I said earlier, we run the second largest budget for the United States of America in international organizations next to NATO. So you can understand the risk that we're opposed with. But to address the issue I just talked about with COVID-19 around the world and the crisis following the crisis, we've increased over 700 flights a month just to move food and people around the world because borders are blocked. We have an African desert locust swarms that are biblical in proportion right now that we're spending nearly $150 million on to try to control these locusts. Because we know if we're not successful, it could cost us upwards of $3.25 billion in food aid just to fix the problem if these locusts are allowed to continue to multiply and move across the Sahel of Africa all the way to the Atlantic coast on the west side of Africa. We've got our hands full, but I can tell you, once you go to one of these African nations and you go into a camp where the internally displaced people are at, where they've been for 4 generations, and they've not been able to have opportunities that so many of us are used to seeing in our lives. We can do better. We will do better. And I'm proud to be an American, and I'm proud to represent the United States here in Rome, making sure we increase food security. And I can assure you, I will deliver on the promise of representing our country to the best of my ability, representing agriculture. God bless you all. Have a great evening. Thanks for coming again. And I can tell you, I'll be back someday, and I look forward to visiting with each and every one of you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Good evening. Welcome to the Tom Farms customer event. My name is Christy Wendell. I am the field sales representative for DeKalb and Asgrow. And as you can tell, this event looks a little different this year. Just like 2020 has been a little different for all of us. But I want to go ahead and give you a highlight of who Bayer Crop Science is, as well as DeKalb Asgrow. You've probably seen the DeKalb Asgrow logo associated with Monsanto in the past. In the past couple of years, Monsanto and Bayer Crop Science have actually come together. Bayer's always been in the crop science business from a crop protection and a fungicide standpoint, and Monsanto's always had a leading presence in the seed side. So those two have come together to create a whole portfolio, and it's been our privilege to be able to work with Tom Farms and provide them with the seed and the traits that they need. And Tom Farms in return also gets to work with us in growing that corn seed that we then are able to sell back to other farmers. So we've had a great relationship here with Tom Farms. So from a high level, you might wonder, who is Bayer? Who's Bayer Crop Science? You've probably seen the Bayer logo on a few different items throughout your house. There is a Bayer Consumer Health Division, which was where we get our aspirin, Bayer aspirin. You've also probably seen it on Coppertone sunscreen. There's several baby products that Bayer has. Bayer also has their pharmaceutical side. So along with some of the craziness of 2020 and the COVID-19 pandemic, Bayer's been really active and helping to find a solution through vaccines and putting all of our pharmaceutical resources there. We've also donated several in a monetary donation and also from a food standpoint. This goes along with the Bayer's vision, which is health for all and hunger for none. So through our pharmaceuticals on the health side and through our crop science division, on the food side, we're really striving to meet that vision of health for all and hunger for none. You may wonder, why is a corn and soybean field rep standing in the middle of a really beautiful flower field? This flower field is taped, it's June, we're here at CiraServe, which you probably drove by to get to the event tonight, and this is our pollinator garden. So we understand the importance of bees in our ecosystem, we understand the amount of food that they affect, and what Bayer has done through their research, through our partnership with different universities, is provide the pollinator seed to these gardens for individuals like Tom Farms, different schools, FFAs have been really involved in getting these pollinator gardens established. It's a habitat for the bees, just a way to help promote sustainability and innovation in this industry. So that's why we're in a field full of beautiful flowers, and that's part of what Bayer does to promote sustainability. We're really thankful to partner with Tom Farms in this. We also see an example of Tom Farms that you've probably noticed as you work with them is their innovation, is their sustainability. So they ask the question of, how do we use our resources better, whether that's fertilizer, whether that's water, whether that's land. From a Bayer crop science standpoint, we have a data platform called Climate Field View. We've been able to partner with Tom Farms and see what trials are working, how are we using our resources wisely, how can we use that data to make decisions better, how can we use that data to share with you, our land partners, better. So I really appreciate seeing that side of the business as well. And I think finally, from the Bayer side, and really just a human impact is it's the people. You know, you work with Tom Farms, you understand their people, their motivation, the thread that connects all of us in agriculture, which is hard work. That's also what I appreciate, working with Bayer, the teams that I've worked with, the people I've been able to just influence and learn from. And I would say if there's one thing I could ask you to take away from this event, if you have stood there and watched this, thank you. And that's to tell your story. So whether it's agriculture, you know, if it's differences between neighbors, it's you know what these farmers are doing, you know how we're trying to feed the world in a sustainable way, in a healthy way. And so if you hear people questioning, or you have lots of neighbors that are probably generations removed, you probably have neighbors that are generations removed from the farm. Tell your story. Explain about, maybe you drove by the pollinator garden, you've seen farmers that are using resources wisely. It's really just telling your story. An example of that, I will share with you that I grew up on a family farm. We had row crops and we dairied for a while for obvious reasons, got out of the dairy from pricing and labor standpoint, and then fed out cows. I was able to be involved in 4-H and FFA, and to all those that are in 4-H this year, I see you, great job, keep working and learning. I know the fair looks different this year, so I wanted to give our 4-Hers a shout out. Hopefully 2021, we'll be able to get back and see you. But I would say agriculture has really impacted my life, and the fact that I was the third daughter. I loved farming. My mom passed away when I was a teenager, which then my dad and I continued to farm together. So that drove home to me the importance of patience and hard work. You know, I would unload grain wagons and be doing my homework in between. I learned how long it took for a 4960 to fork ground. So that had a huge impact in me, the people that I worked with, and that's what's led me to this career where for the past 10 years, I've been able to work with a lot of great farms, a lot of great farmers, and a lot of great corporations to see how we continue to make farming better, and that the next generation will be able to continue taking care of the land and just pursuing more and greater in everything that they do. So my ask is just tell your story for agriculture, and thank you for being here this evening.
Hello. So here's my topic, estate planning. I'll do that later. I hear that so often. I'll get with you later, Polly, when I'm older, when I'm sicker, when I'm richer, when I've paid down the debt and I know what's going to happen with my kids and my grandkids. I'll get with you later. And that's fine unless you die. So that's how I'm framing this discussion. What if you die tomorrow? Well, then you've missed the opportunity to plan. I'm going to skip my introduction, just let you know I'm Polly Dobbs, and I'll direct you to my website, dobbslegal.com. It's in the bottom right of these slides. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom of my homepage, you will find a video that Farm Journal produced about my family farm. It's just one example of how we have handled farm succession planning. It might not be the right fit for you. Every family is different, and your plan should be customized to achieve the goals for your land and for your family. So, is co-ownership at the next generation best? This is how I frame the issue and start the conversation with my clients. First of all, do you want your children to retain ownership of your land? Is that important, or is it fine if they sell when you're gone? Every family's different. Then I ask, should your children be in business together? And if we're just talking about land ownership, should they be co-owners of your land together. And I meet with a lot of farmers and they'll just shake their head and say, no, that's not a good idea. Could your kids get along well enough to just split the cash rent? And if you're still saying no, probably not. Will one want to sell? And if so, do you want the others to have to buy that one out? Or do you want a plan in place where they're all stuck together unless they can voluntarily agree on buying and selling ownership among each other? So if you're shaking your head and co-ownership at the next generation just isn't feeling right for your family, do something different. Pursue a different plan. Pick different assets to go to different children, or define specific terms where one child is going to buy out certain assets, for example, land, from other children at death. Generally, avoid tenants in common. So on my slide, I say equal tenants in common ownership may set the stage for a family feud. And along the way, I do a lot of these presentations, so I got a little cute and marked it off and say, will. It's going to be a problem. If everybody's name is just on the deed, they are tenants in common, and partition actions can allow any one tenant in common to trigger a court-ordered auction, no matter how small an interest he or she owns. So this is often misunderstood among farmers. It is not majority rules. If you've got 3 kids and you think 2 of them have their head on straight and they're going to keep the 3rd one in line, that's not how it works. That one child can go to court, force a partition action, and in very short order end up with a sheriff's auction. And a lot of my clients say, oh, Polly, my kids get along, they'll be just fine. Well, okay, then it's going to be one of their spouses. Human nature is just greed. And when you die and this land is appraised, there is a big number on a piece of paper, and human nature is just, how can I get mine? And so it's not your kid maybe, but it's somebody's spouse that we ought to be worrying about. But just know that any one tenant in common can throw a wrench in the plans as far as, do we keep the land? If so, who are we going to lease it to? And at what price or on what terms? If you've got one that you know is going to be a problem, let's plan for it. And then be specific. Don't assume that your kids are going to figure it out. So the second point about the step up in cost basis at death, making heirs eager to sell for no capital gains, that's very powerful. So your kids might sit across the table from you now and say, no, we'll never sell the farm. Well, the minute you're gone, that land gets a step up in basis, and the kids can sell it the next day for no capital gains. So a story I have here is one of my best friends since childhood works for Halderman Farms. He auctions farms, that's his job. And he frequently meets with the kids while they're still wearing their clothes from the funeral. As you know, a lot of farm families, the kids have gone to the cities and left the farm, and they don't come home very often, but they're going to come home for the funeral. So while they're in town, still dressed in their funeral clothes, they'll stop by and ink that broker's contract to put the farm up for auction. That's not necessarily wrong, but if your plan for your family's land is not for it to be auctioned the day after your funeral, then you should put a plan in place. So brief explanation about basis. If you bought the farm decades ago for $300 an acre and now it's worth 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, depending. If you sold it while you were alive and breathing, you're going to have a big capital gain between your basis and the sales price. Upon death, basis gets stepped up to date of death value. So the minute you stop breathing, the cost basis in that land becomes equal to fair market value, which means when it sells after your death, there's zero capital gain. So that really seems to take the reins off the heirs. They're just running free towards the auction because they know that they don't have to pay any tax on that. They'll just get to keep that. So avoid tenants in common, I said. So here I say, do it better. Instead of your kids co-owning all the land together, consider dividing it up so that everybody gets different ground. If they are going to co-own the land, let's do better than just having their names on the deed as tenants in common. Do it inside an entity, like an LLC, or maybe inside a trust. And then you have the control to pick and choose who's going to be in charge, if there are going to be first rights to lease provided to an operator that you handpick. If a sale is anticipated, you provide a clear path, how we're going to determine purchase price and payment terms. So for example, maybe somebody gets a first right to purchase it, and if it's a related family member, maybe you want that to be on installment over a term of years at a low family-friendly interest rate to make it less burdensome on the one who's buying. Or if you just have specific thoughts about who ought to have a first right of refusal and you want it to be at appraised value, be specific. Who's going to select the appraiser? Maybe there's going to be 2 appraisers and the average of those 2 is what the purchase price is going to be. But lay it all out. And if the kids are going to be co-owners, then let's have some kind of structure around the land ownership so we can have rules in place. Now, careful with blended families. I get this call at least once a quarter. Hey, dad died and stepmom sold the farm. Or a different call is, dad died and stepmom redid her will and cut us out. And my response is, well, of course she did. This is just what happens. Dad's gone now. And if stepmom was the joint owner on the deed, then it's her farm and she can do whatever she wants with it. So I empathize with the caller, and I'm sorry that that happened. But if dad had wanted to protect the farm for ultimate ownership by his natural children, he should have done something. One example is a marital trust. We can provide for stepmom income off the farm for her whole life. We love spouses. We want to help them maintain the same standard of living they had as when both spouses were alive. But just some control to avoid outright distribution of the farm to that step parent, so we know that eventually ownership is going to come back to natural children. I hear a lot about, keep it in the blood. Well, a marital trust is an easy tool to do that, and it helps balance out protecting the spouse's income stream with ultimate ownership to natural children. I'm not trying to beat up on stepmoms here. This might not be intentional, but as years go by and we have dementia and Alzheimer's creeping in, that stepmom can be very easily swayed by her children or by her next spouse or her next spouse's children. Like I said, this land will be appraised when you're gone, and there's a big number on a piece of paper, and that might drive somebody to prop stepmom up in front of a lawyer and get her to sign a new will that changes things. And sure, you can argue incapacity or that it should be overturned, but that's expensive. So just having some protection in place, it's very important. For most of my farm clients, their land has such an important legacy behind it. It's too important to leave it to chance that your spouse will do the right thing. Because at the end of life, it might be unintentional and some careless acts can unwind things. But family trees are made up all sorts of different ways. And I frequently see farms become titled jointly with their subsequent spouse. So with the second or third or fourth spouse to prove love. I love you so much. We're married now. We're going to combine our assets. I'm going to put your name on the deed to my farm. We want to fully combine our assets and our families. And I think that is just a terrible idea. Yes, you love each other. There are lots of ways to love each other, but just putting joint names on a deed is really setting the stage for a future disaster. So embrace marital trust and do proper planning with blended families. Now, brief note on prenups, because it's something that I'm passionate about. People come to me and they say, Polly, I need a will. Well, yeah, you probably need a will, but you may need a trust, and you probably need powers of attorney for finance and healthcare. And there are these foundational documents that put together a good estate plan. And I say that a good farm succession plan absolutely needs to include prenuptial agreements for children and grandchildren of that farm family. That should just be considered standard. Trusts are helpful, and I draft a lot of trusts, and they can only provide so much divorce protection, depending on a lot of factors, including how much control the beneficiary has. So there's this sliding scale. Ultimately, discretion is going to be given to the judge in the county seat where your kid or grandkid is getting divorced in the future. And that's a big risk and a big unknown. So a lot of farm kids say, well, we're poor. We don't have any assets. We don't need a prenup. Well, you're poor now, but the prenuptial agreement can identify your anticipated future inheritance from parents or grandparents of this family farm and identify that as your separate property. Whatever you get by buying in or being gifted during lifetime or as an inheritance at death, that can be identified as separate property that will not come to the table in a divorce. And it lets the estate plans of the prior generations be very simple, because if we know there's a prenup in place, just outright distributions of assets is fine, because we have that assurance that it's not going to be divided up in a divorce. My next point about buy-sell provisions, those are helpful in divorce scenarios. Those are nice. But the way a buy-sell provision works is if one owner is getting divorced, the other owners can buy it back. So we keep it together and we stop it from being fractionalized. But you heard me say buy it back. Somebody's opening up a checkbook to get that back. And if we have a prenuptial agreement in place that says your ownership in the family farm or whatever entity it's wrapped up inside is your separate property and we're not going to fight about it, nobody has to pay for anything. And that married couple can just go about dividing their other assets that they've built together and not touching the farm assets that have come from prior generations. So please understand, prenups don't just help in the event of divorce. Marriage certificates bring along very strong property rights at death too. Spouses have the right to elect assets at death, and that can be waived in a prenup. So my prior slide talking about how marital trusts are wonderful and can help achieve balances, well, you need the flexibility to use a marital trust. And without a prenuptial agreement waiving the right to elect assets at death, that spouse doesn't have to be satisfied with just a trust for their benefit. They can say, oh no, I will elect against the will and I will own a share of that land so I can sell it, leave it to my own kids. You know, it's mine. It's not inside a trust. So to have the flexibility we need, prenups need to waive those rights to assets at death. And so I start out by talking about how all farm kids and grandkids need prenups. And then I end by saying prenups for subsequent marriages in golden years are a must. So when someone goes through the grief of losing a spouse, that is absolutely a terrible thing. And if you can get through that grief and find love again, that's wonderful. But please sign a prenuptial agreement to protect the family farm before you enter into a subsequent marriage in your golden years. So estate planning has really changed as the tax acts have adjusted our estate tax exemption over the years. And so now I say we should focus on step up in basis planning. So lifetime gifting, which was estate planning 101 for decades, is give it away during lifetime so that you can fit the farm that you still own at death underneath the exemption. Well, now the exemption's higher than ever. Temporarily, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but it's higher than it's ever been. So that old planning concept of giving away ownership of the farm during lifetime is not advisable if you anticipate those kids are going to sell. Maybe they won't sell all of it, but what if they sell a few acres over there that aren't adjacent to the homestead, or they want to sell part at some point? Even amongst each other, they want to sell. We really want that step up in basis at death. So lifetime gifts have carryover basis. So if you paid $300 an acre for it and you give it to your kids during lifetime, their basis is $300 an acre for it. That's how that works. To have the magic of the step up, you have to own it at death. So whenever a family's at my table talking about lifetime gifting and they know there's going to be a future sale, we have to do careful analysis of the estate tax exemption and the savings we can have of estate tax versus the capital gains you are locking in, because you're saddling your kids with your low basis, and when they sell, it's going to be high. You're locking that in with a lifetime gift. So we really need to go through that analysis and determine what the right fit is. And then this last point, because of these new tax laws and higher than ever estate tax exemptions, it might make sense to give back gifts upstream. So if grandma gave ownership in the family corporation for years, gave it away to kids and grandkids, let's give that back up to grandma so she owns all the shares at death. We get the step up in basis and we have a lot more flexibility and the step up in basis. And I say, wait, what? Because that's backwards. Estate planning for years was about lifetime gifting, and now we might want to give those gifts back. So every situation is different, but that's something to talk about with your advisors. So similarly here, if we're going to focus on maximizing the step up in basis, we want to make sure the ground is properly titled. So many farms were owned half by husband or husband's trust, half by wife's trust. And that was standard planning pre-2011, before portability came about, and it was okay for husbands and wife to own everything together, and they didn't each need their own separate assets. So a big note here that might limit the step up in basis for the whole farm at the second death. So if dad dies first, mom lives a couple more decades, half the farm is going to be stuck at the date of death of dad's death, and only half the farm gets stepped up to the later date of death value at mom's death. So we want to focus on being able to get the whole farm stepped up. In case there's a sale or even sales among family members, we just as soon have all that happen at zero capital gains recognition. And generally, old estate plans need to be dusted off that have that A-B trust planning, this concept of part of the land's going to be owned by husband's trust at his death. If your spouse is already deceased and some of your land is trapped in a credit shelter trust or a B trust, there are lots of different acronyms for it. I just have a note here that we may be able to get that out so it achieves a full step up in basis. I mean, it's really sad when you end up with 6 figures of capital gains tax because there is no step up in basis at mom's subsequent death and dad's been gone for decades. So there is lots of room for planning here because the tax landscape has shifted so dramatically. So I ask my clients to start this process by posing the question, what if you die tomorrow? So don't get hung up on 20 years from now, things might be different. If you're still living 20 years from now, you will have revisited this plan and re-examined things. So plan for now based on today's circumstances. Your original plan should allow as much flexibility as possible. The plan needs to be reviewed whenever there's a change in the laws or a change in circumstances, and adjust it if necessary. Don't go into this thinking it's one and done. Go into it thinking that you're going to tweak this and make some adjustments as time goes on and as things change. And just please know that there is no one size fits all solution. You can't copy what your neighbor did. You certainly don't have to copy what previous generations did, especially if you don't like how it turned out. Feel free to do things differently. But families change, assets change, and boy, does the tax law change. So go into the whole process knowing that you're going to plan for today, but dust it off every 5 years. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.